Chapter 1. The day was cold, like any typical February evening. No snow on the ground, which was a blessing given the last couple of years. The sunset was ashen and seemed to melt the sky and land together in a great orgy of imagery. Of late, gray seems to be the constant with the Devlin family, thought Doyle. His face was full of concern as he started out along the property. Doyle was now 26 years old, a respectable businessman in his own right. His father, arguably the wealthiest man on the planet, chose to stay here, North Dakota, the middle of nowhere as far as Doyle was concerned. He had chosen an anonymous town of some 60,000 people and built his unassuming home there. He could build 20 castles practically anywhere in the world, but instead wanted modesty. His dad constantly made the usual rounds in town when there were festivals, church, school events, and charities. He always gave donations, public speaking, and jobs to people in town. He never considered himself above them, but always one of them, a real-life North Dakotan. Ha, he thought, always talking about his roots dating back to some outlandish Irish Gaelic descent. Apart from the name Devlin, he had no particular evidence of a Gaelic heritage. Bizarre, especially as his dad talked like it was just a few years ago in his youth, not hundreds of years. Amazing, really, but that was his dad, Calder Devlin, an outdoorsy kind of man who loved lakes and green fields. He would often make comments about living in Dakota because of its height above sea level, mixed with its visually stimulating natural surroundings. Their home, he jest, was an undiscovered or forgotten land most people in the United States would have no interest in. Wilderness, rugged outdoors, rivers, streams, and the forces of nature didn't really appeal to this world anymore. Technological advances which made life easier and people lazier were the new lifestyle. Social norms kept changing with the evolution of the internet, Wi-Fi, and tech gadgets. The place didn't have extravagant resorts like Disney World, or beautiful beaches full of spring breakers, but it was the old land where people endured and lived peacefully. It was a paradise on earth, if anyone was looking. His second home. Their home was built by one of his dad's companies, founded on constructing homes to withstand the elements. Of course, as Doyle thought, the elements themselves were more than occasional snow or rain. The home was fairly resistant to earthquakes, floods, or the occasional high winds due to spring storms. Calder liked to design very practical things which positively affected people's lives. Practicality can save lives, but unfortunately, it can cost money, and people are always resistant to that. Calder himself had worked with some of the more worthy visionaries of the early 90s to begin designing homes for people who chose to live in areas of extreme weather. His dad used to tell him how, back in his day, a man simply had to be tough and survive by his own hand and wit. Then he'd get that far-off look and say something about the past which made no sense to Doyle, ever. At times, his dad acted like he had lived in another era. It was almost like his father could read minds. Everyone's. It was a gift in its own right, which to a man in business like Doyle himself would be very beneficial. Knowing when to deal with the bureaucracy of the business world was an important trait for any successful entrepreneur seeking a living out in the wild. For that's exactly what the business world is, the wild. Calder understood human nature all too well. He didn't stop at understanding the economic aspects of human nature, but could also operate smoothly within the beliefs and constructs of other countries and peoples. Religions, creeds, races, or even the political agendas of his political employees or customers. He was a man immersed in understanding people. Doyle himself wouldn't be in the nice, comfortable job setting he had now if it hadn't been for his dad, a multi-millionaire with interests right across the business spectrum. Doyle appreciated the luxury of having a father who could provide such opportunities for his son, but it came with negatives as well. Calder seemed to have his hands into a little bit of everything, which made it really easy for his son to choose any profession, simply because his dad owned it or part of it. Doyle loved his father, but when it came to the raising of his 3 kids, time was never a luxury that his father seemed to afford. A man can get spread out pretty thin when balancing the business affairs of many organizations, a family, personal life, and social agendas locally. His younger brother, Gavin, was finishing his last year of college here in the Bismarck area and would soon join the ranks of the legendary Devlin family in the working world. His employment was set, and he would have to go through the ranks just like Doyle did. Where Doyle was practical, compromising, and a realist, his young brother Gavin was more headstrong. Gavin had a streak of impulsivity, sometimes confrontational, and more often than not, a dreamer. Calder doted on his younger son and bragged a lot about him. It used to bother Doyle at times, but eventually, he was secure enough in his own life and what made him happy. He hadn't grown into the kind of man who competes for his father's attention. Doyle's little sister, Brandon, was only 18 years old. He thought. Dad's little princess. I doubt she'll have to work much in her life. It's not that Doyle didn't love his family, but being a realist, he called them as he saw them. Brandon seemed to have a special place in Calder's heart. He protected her most, and programmed that call to action in both brothers ever since she was born. Brandon took full advantage of the protective brother privilege as well as her dad's status. Typical freaking teenager who thought she was high and mighty. She was given cars, clothes, and a nice line of credit. It got worse when their mom died. His dad was heartbroken and forlorn. He never once tried to find anyone else or replace their mother. He became both parents, try as he might. Overcompensating would be a more accurate description. If it wasn't for Aunt McKenna, the family dynamic would have been shattered. Of all the people in the house, it was Aunt McKenna who could bring Calder Devlin back down to earth, or make him see reason. Calder had been a bit older than most men to start a family of 3 with their mom, but his years and his appearance were 2 different things. Their father told Doyle when he was old enough there was a true secret to the Devlin family. It would be revealed to him and his little brother in time. Lord knows what his wily father had up his sleeve for that event. Probably a crystal ball. Calder could also be eccentric, as he was genius, which of course brought Doyle back to his original thoughts. His father's health and the cold outside. Doyle had been working out in California for a while now. Man, how he loved those beaches. However, a quick phone call from his Aunt McKenna had prompted him to drop work and fly back home. Aunt McKenna was very loving, but stern enough to never have weakness or frailty in her voice. Her demeanor had unnerved Doyle and sent him into immediate action. It was one thing for his dad to have a range of emotions given whatever was happening at the time, but Aunt McKenna was the consistent rock of the family. Apparently, his dad's health had taken a strange turn for the worse. It wasn't like Doyle had been unaware of the situation to start out with, but with all the connections and money his dad had at his disposal, he simply figured his father would be taken care of and back on his feet quickly. Funny thing about the human body and disease, they're unpredictable and equally elusive to even the most skilled of minds. Cancer was no different and worked on its own scale. Even after all this time, it was an unpredictable disease which might be cured, contained, or simply unwavering in its attack on the human body. Calder Devlin, who had been the epitome of health and vitality, was now in full assault by this internal invader. Doyle's own mind kept wondering about what would happen to the seemingly unending empire that his father had built. He most certainly wouldn't be able to manage it, nor did he have any desire to if his father died. He was the oldest, and neither of his siblings was old enough to fathom the Devlin riches endowed upon their bloodline, let alone do anything with the companies their father owned. His thoughts were interrupted by a sweet, but no-nonsense voice. "Doyle, you really should stop biting your lips. You'll have no skin left to kiss the pretty girls who line up for you on these business trips of yours." Startled, Doyle turned around quickly to a sad, smiling aunt. Aunt McKenna had been one of his dad's oldest friends, and she protected his dad unlike anyone he had ever seen. At times, she was almost as mysterious as he was. She and Calder shared private glances and jokes together that only they knew about. Even if you did hear what they were saying, it still made no true sense. "Hi, Aunt McKenna," responded her nephew. Don't worry about my lips. They'll grow back. Besides, I suspect the girls would kiss my whatever, being the great Calder Devlin's son. Money seems to do that with people, or at least to people who want it. His reply was meant to be a little sarcastic, but humorous. It didn't seem to have the effect he had hoped. Doyle took a couple of steps and embraced his aunt in a comforting hug. "He's not doing very well, is he?" Doyle flatly stated. "No, baby, he's not. It must be a cold day indeed when I live to see me outliving Calder. This cancer is beyond medical science now. It won't be long at all. A couple of days or weeks are all your dad has left," she said morosely. Her candor was always refreshing to Doyle, who spent most of his days around business cronies looking for a leg up, so it was bullshit time whenever they saw him coming. Aunt McKenna never sugar-coated it, and you could count on straightforward answers. The true acknowledgement of his father's mortality had finally, for the first time, hit home hard. Doyle wasn't a fool. All the questions and fears he had been theorizing in his mind came forth in a maelstrom of emotions. However, her response was not the one Doyle wanted to hear. His dad was only 67. By rights, he should have another 10 years left, at least, on the horizon. Time is a funny thing, or maybe fate. Doyle couldn't make up his mind which one. Aunt McKenna woke him out of his personal thoughts by taking his hand and pulling him towards his dad's room. The realization that he was to confront his dad weighed heavily on him. What could he say? With this new twist in things, there was so much unsaid, and even more to evaluate and decide upon. Besides, where was his brother? "Aunt McKenna, wait," Doyle croaked, as his aunt gently pulled at him to follow her. "I'm not quite ready for this, and perhaps it would be best if we just waited until Gavin got here. I really think this should be done as a family." Doyle didn't feel comfortable dealing one-on-one with his father. Calder had a knack for sensing the internal feelings of whoever he was with and saying the right thing. But Doyle did not feel ready to risk a conversation where the topic might turn to his father's imminent death. McKenna allowed her nephew a moment to collect himself and stared quizzically at him. "Doyle, you are who Calder wants to see. It's very important now to be with him. His time is short, and the information he has to share is imperative. Please do not back away from your family responsibility. He wanted you for a reason. If he felt Gavin was ready, he would have invited him." She looked upon Doyle with such sympathetic eyes, like a comforting grandmother offering security. "Sweetheart, it's time you and your father get acquainted. There's not much time left, and unfortunately, you will never get a fraction of that understanding. However, there are certain things which must be addressed to you." With that, she grabbed his hand and walked with finality to Mr. Devlin's bedroom. Right before they got to his father's door, Doyle whispered, "McKenna, what's going on?" "Your father wants your undivided attention, boy. He has more to tell you than he has time left on this planet. Much of it will seem outlandish and the ravings of an old man. But take heart, Doyle. Your father is quite in control of his faculties. Just keep an open mind. The time for tales is at hand." There was a twinkle in her eye at that, and a true smile of mischievous nature. It was the Aunt McKenna he had grown up with, and he trusted her implicitly. Her expression was one of kindness and warmth. Doyle was nervous, yet anxious to be about this business of secrets quickly. McKenna let go of her nephew's hand, knocked on the door. A tired but solemn voice answered, "Come in." McKenna allowed Doyle to step in first. In the modest bedroom was a queen-size bed, with its covers thrown in all directions. Doyle's vision adjusted to see his father, Calder Devlin, sitting in an old Victorian chair, leaning on a cane with a large white handle. No, thought Doyle, it's not a cane at all, but the grip of a sword sheathed in a black scabbard. The silver handle, with gold inlay, had strange markings all over it. It was a curious piece for his dad to be holding. "I guess I'll be getting the eccentric father personality today," mused Doyle. Perhaps Dad's a little more gone than poor McKenna thought. At that moment, Calder let a low chuckle escape his mouth and looked at Doyle with piercing eyes. That'll be all, McKenna. I'll let you know when I'm ready for my next diaper change, he said jokingly. Well, Mr. Devlin, if you don't take it easy, I'll be up here to spoon-feed you baby food, and then perhaps bend you over my knee for a good burping, quipped McKenna. Her face took on a more somber expression. Seriously, Calder, you have to take it easy. I expect you to not exert yourself too much. I realize what you have before you, but take it in stride. McKenna looked on Calder with the loving eyes of a daughter, not an adopted sister, and then she slowly left the room to her surrogate family. Calder turned to his son and smirked a little. No, Doyle, I haven't gone too crazy yet. And yes, this is a sword. I would not presume to fool you. With that, he chuckled to himself again. Calder waved his son to the seat across from him. Doyle was hesitant to move, and seeing his father so vulnerable was hard to bear. After all, he was the great Calder Devlin. Not so great, I think, commented Calder. It appears that time has finally caught up with me. And between you and me, Doyle, that's saying a lot. The last comment brought Doyle out of his quiet stupor. How had his father known what he was thinking? Not only knew it, but verbally responded to it. Here was something to get a little worked up about. Another one-on-one with Dad, always 10 steps ahead. Dad, how did you know what I was thinking? Doyle said warily. It's not so hard with you, Doyle. After all, being a father, I kinda know these things. In your looks. Calder turned his head slightly to gaze out the window. Doyle wasn't exactly buying the explanation, but what else could it be but coincidence? His father began coughing a little, no doubt from the cancer that was affecting his lungs. Funny, his father started, how fragile the human body really is, and yet capable of doing such powerful deeds. Take this sword, for example. A man can cut and bleed out at the contact of its blade against his skin. However, the man wielding this weapon, with training, proper training, can create a beautiful dance of movement, graceful for the eyes to behold. His dad had had that faraway look as per his nature. However, disease internally to a body can do just as much damage, but over a long range of time. Tell me, Doyle, if you could choose the manner of your death, would it be engaged in a combat of sorts? Competitive match, in which you could have a chance of controlling the outcome? Or would you take the cards dealt to you through Mother Nature and hope to die in your sleep someday, after aging to the point where being old is too much to bear? Doyle shifted in his seat, avoiding his father's gaze. I don't really know how to answer that, Dad. I mean, I've never really had a fistfight, so I couldn't put myself in a scenario where I make such a choice. He paused a moment, reflecting, then said, I suppose I would grow old and let the chips fall where they may. His father took in his son, and a serious look crossed his face, almost as if another person emerged. Doyle was wondering if his response had triggered this effect, for his father leaned toward him and began very slowly. Doyle, your mother and I spent many a night talking about this moment when you and your siblings were much younger. We had arguments about the proper approach and how much to tell you. She was quite a woman, Doyle, one for the ages. After a small pause, he continued, You see, Doyle, your heritage is much different than you've come to believe. What is inside our family now has survived countless centuries in the hope that our family, our ancestry, would prevail in the coming battles, whose seeds were sown before we were even born. Unfortunately, your mom, Tegan, didn't make it this far to be here. God rest her soul. He dramatically paused. Like so many before you, Doyle, I have watched everyone either die or give way to time and grow old. It had always been a dream of mine. One day, I would be able to live a life blessed in one human lifespan, to know all the joys and sorrows of love, children, and growing old. Finally return home to a place I had forgotten about for so long. It's funny, he went on, when we cannot remember something. We cannot miss it. But yet there still is that something which itches away at us. You know the old saying, ignorance is bliss? Doyle reflected. Are you saying it's better to know you have forgotten something and to miss it, rather than to have forgotten it as if you have never known it? Calder stopped there as his breathing was beginning to get labored, and it appeared he was coming to some climactic crescendo. However, to Doyle, he was speaking like a madman. Madman, ha! Exclaimed Calder, looking at his son sharply. I only wish I was mad. However, it's time for you to know where we come from, and who your father really is. His voice was matter-of-fact. Doyle balked. Dad, stop. This is making no sense, and to be quite frank, how the hell do you keep reading my mind like that? I'm not even speaking out loud, yet you answer me as if we just had a polite verbal exchange. To be honest, I have on my best poker face trying to take you at face value, but come on. This stuff coming out of your mouth is crazy talk. Doyle began to rise out of his seat, but his father reached out and pulled him back down, much faster and stronger than Doyle would have expected. Relax, Doyle. This is difficult for me to tell you because, in truth, I cannot prove what I say anymore, or at least not to your satisfaction. I simply don't have the time and health to do so. Make no mistake, what I am saying is factual, and your Aunt McKenna will corroborate what you will learn today in earnest. Slowly, his dad sat back in his chair and stared directly at his son. So, I guess the best way to explain things is to start at the beginning. Understand, I don't have enough time left in this world to share with you all the experiences I've had, but you will know the truth of things at face value, Dad, Doyle said, trying to deflect his father's attempt at some reconciliation or purging of the soul. Perhaps we should wait until Gavin gets here. I mean, he's almost graduated college and would probably want to get in on this. This time, Doyle did get up and made his way to the door. I'm not Calder Devlin, his father blurted out. Now that got Doyle's attention quickly. He turned around slowly and replied, What do you mean, you are not Calder Devlin? Well, actually, it's just a name I was given a long time ago to hide my true personage. Please, sit down. Doyle, this is hard enough to say to you, without having to run after you. Calder gently took his sword and motioned towards the seat beside him. Doyle respectfully returned and sat down, nodding to his father to continue. My real name is Ramiel, an ancient archangel of the Lord. I was also known as Uriel of the fallen angels. I was made on the mortal plane during the times of what you might refer to as the Old Testament in the Bible. My name meant God's thunder. Of course, I didn't know or remember any of this until the final apex. Until that time, I walked the earth fallen from God's eternity. During that time, I took a wife, Kinsley, and for a while we lived in a relative peace in the Gaelic lands of what is now called Ireland. It was a much simpler life I led. Quiet, a true union of the soul with my love. I wasn't alone, and someone who had been rejected by all those he loved and should have loved him. I had found a small piece of heaven on earth, until an outspoken ancient Scandinavian warlord by the name of Magnus found me. It was then he taught me partly about who I was and what destiny lay ahead of me. Like you right now, Doyle, I thought he was full of horse shit. Tales of sword fights, The apex. Perceived immortals. What whimsical nonsense. Doyle hadn't relaxed much, but now he was more than ever in disbelief at his old man. The idea creeped into his mind that it was probably a mercy to humor him in his current state of mind, so he politely continued to listen to this tale of fantasy and intrigue. Magnus trained me in the art of swordplay to help protect myself against the others, the older man continued, pausing to catch his breath. He grabbed the cup of wine on the table between him and his son and took a long drink. Doyle's expression was not only one of skepticism, but also of relief at what his father was telling him. Man, he thought, I was beginning to think this would be something serious like family assets and stuff like that. Watch yourself, Doyle. This business I am telling you about includes everything, including assets, as well as the future of our family, cried his father, not missing a beat. Doyle, there are some things you will come to accept and others you're going to have to take on blind faith, got it? This time, he was speaking to Doyle, using only his thoughts. This put his son in a tailspin. Whoa! He actually talked to me inside my head. Yes, thought Calder. I can hear your thoughts and respond to them in kind. Impressed a little yet, my skeptical son? Dad, how do you do that? I mean, it's illogical. No human could do that, exclaimed Doyle out loud. What's happening? This isn't logical. I'm too realistic for such things. Is this a new technology your cronies have invented? Calder looked at his son and shrugged. You just experienced it, Doyle. So, you tell me. With that, Calder took another sip of his drink. I think I'll miss the subtle taste of good wine when I'm gone. He seemed to truly enjoy the smell and taste of his libation with a kind of reverence. Doyle was simply perplexed about the situation. He knew his dad was intelligent and had more than a little luck when it came to his uncanny knack at buying and selling stuff, as well as creating what the market wanted in today's society. Hell, Calder Devlin. Wait, not Calder, but Ramiel? What the hell? Dad, what do you mean Calder Devlin in Gaelic lands? Exclaimed Doyle. Christ, that's simply more impossible than you reading minds. I mean, come on. Give your son something a little more tangible here. You're talking like you were born before boats were created or something. He spat cynically. Doyle decided he had as many surprises as there were to take, yet still, here was his dad throwing some pretty heavy, albeit bullshittish things his way. Patiently, Calder responded to his son's thoughts. Doyle, I was born to an immortal life. However, once I matured to the age where I simply no longer aged, my time to enter into the apex had begun. From then on, I could not die, except if my essence were drained by another immortal. Think of it like a bad vampiric story. No, there's no such thing as a vampire per se. But there definitely are similarities which mimic their origin tales. Immortals are bound by God's creation. We were made very similar to man, but very different. Angels were supposed to watch over and assist men in their lives. We helped influence choices and prayed for each human who was put in our care. We can feel and smell each other's presences when we get close to one another. There are also demons, fallen angels, who followed Lucifer and his choice to defy God's command, lamented Calder. What was God's command? Asked Doyle skeptically. Calder answered, ignoring Doyle's antagonistic response. Angels were sent to work as guides to humans, not fall in love and commingle with them. They introduced them to what real sin was by falling, so they could have free will like humans. In doing so, they taught man about destruction. They gave them written language, and they interbred with women and spirits and demons. God was furious with these renegade angels. He subjugated them to a fiery hell. He flooded the earth to try and destroy their offspring and the newly wicked mankind, influenced by these fallen betrayers. It began the war between God's angels and the fallen ones, now dubbed demons, explained Calder. He continued, if another immortal can defeat their adversary, the other immortal's life force is coupled, making the survivor stronger and smarter. This is how mankind created the whole idea about vampires, he quipped. Calder paused a moment, assessing his son. He could see the wheels spinning, mostly in disbelief. During the death of an immortal, the victor fully defeats their adversary by two methods. As a rule of thumb, the bad immortals, also known as demons, will slice open the throat and drink the blood of the loser. By slicing the throat, they incapacitate the fallen warrior, allowing the demonic immortal to drink their adversary's life force. Angels, by contrast, who still fought for God, would normally wound them in battle and give the kiss of forgiveness. It looks like the immortal is kissing a mortally wounded one, but in reality, their essence is drained in a more loving manner, one which God would embrace. Calder flinched a bit at the revelation of how immortals killed each other. Doyle looked horrified by what his dad was saying. Calder stopped to take a little breather. It was obvious all this talking was tiring him out. This gave Doyle time to pause and think. His father apparently imagined himself as some Methuselah from the Bible or some man of war mixed with a vampire or something. He supposed such grandiose thoughts might be a side effect of the cancer. He determined to challenge the validity of his dad's thinking. If what you are telling me is true, Dad, and you are some immortal archangel, why are you so old now? I mean, again, this is 2020, and you are old. If I do the math in my head, you would have been young when you became immortal? Hello? You don't look a day under 60. That's not 18. Big difference, retorted Doyle. Also, you acknowledge you are fallen too. How the hell are you not some demon or damned by God? Then he ran his hand through his hair and took greater notice of the sword his father was leaning on. I take it that's the sword you built for your great battles against immortal foes, he teased. The comment more than irritated Calder, who stood quickly without hesitation. He drew the sword out. A distinct ringing came with the unleashing of the sword from its scabbard. He swung it in perfect balance at his son's neckline, stopping a hair's breadth from Doyle's skin. Doyle quickly froze at the movement and gracefulness of the sword in his father's hands. He couldn't even believe his father had the strength, let alone the lightning reflexes, to do such a dexterous move with a weapon of that caliber. The blade rested gently across his neck now. Any slight movement, and no doubt it would cut into his skin. His father looked down upon him with a grim expression. Do not make light of those who I had to kill to survive, Doyle, he hissed. This sword, built for great battles, belonged to my mentor and friend Magnus, who died in battle against Gadriel, my immortal enemy. He was protecting my wife Kinsley while I was gone. It was his soul I took in the end, son. Do not presume to mock me, nor disrespect the tens of thousands of immortals over time, who in the end all died, one way or the other, at the end of a blade. His demeanor changed slightly from one of defiance to now fatigue. I know I'm dying of a disease, but it has not robbed me of my immortal strength to wield a sword. Pausing to get his breath, Calder finished. Just of the strength to breathe. With that, Calder moved the sword away from his son's neck, only to drop the sword to the ground, creating a great thud. Doyle was speechless. He had never seen this side of his father, nor knew who he was looking at. His eyes moved to the floor where the sword hit, and then he heard the door fly open. Startling and spinning around, he faced Aunt McKenna, who was looking at him with a rare expression of anger. "I told him not to get worked up, and I have no doubts you played into that, Doyle. What on earth is the sword doing out of the floor?" she demanded of him. Before he could respond, she cried Calder's name as Doyle turned to see his father collapse to the floor. The exchanging of secrets was at an end, for the moment. Later that evening, Doyle was sitting by the fireplace watching the embers burn off the logs. His father was comfortably sleeping on his bed. Thoughts were running rampant in Doyle's mind. It seemed his father could read minds. What's more, he could communicate mentally back with him. It was too crazy. Yet he had experienced it. To make matters worse, his father threw out a bombshell that he had a false name. If he was who he said he was, what did that mean for Doyle and the rest of his siblings? He knew his father was not a man who was given to flights of fancy. In fact, his father was a very serious individual when talking about helping humanity. He was very honorable and took great stock in matters of the family. Whose family are we talking here? Thought Doyle. Our family, of course, son, responded his father quietly from his bed, eyes still shut. Startled again by this mental intrusion, Doyle jumped a little. "I'm sorry, Doyle. I truly do not mean to intrude on your thoughts. Generally, what I hear and know from people, I keep to myself without answering. I just do not have much time left to be coy with you anymore." Doyle pondered this statement for a short time and then responded, "All right, Father, you wanted to talk. Let's start from the beginning. You mentioned immortality. How does that work exactly, with you guys killing each other?" Calder laid there a second, lost in thought, and then answered. Trying to come up with a tangible answer which made sense seemed a daunting task to the old Gaelic warrior. "The immortals had a purpose, son. We war against each other until we reach the apex. In the end, the one left would inherit their knowledge and power back from God. If it was one of the fallen who claimed victory, they could corrupt and destroy mankind. For an angel, they would remember everything and be welcomed back to God's kingdom. It is the war's apex which drives many of the immortals who sought power to kill other immortals in order to grow stronger," mused Calder. Doyle interjected, rationalizing. "Wait a minute, Dad. Weren't you a fallen as well? How can you not be what you classify as a demon?" "An excellent question, son," replied Calder. "The war between angels and demons took its toll on both sides. In an effort to limit the countless deaths resulting from the sheer defiance and anger of our fallen brethren, Michael led a final breach into Lucifer's ranks. He brought the battle and honor to God as he stood on the battlefield with Lucifer under the sword. Lucifer vowed that what was left of his followers would annihilate the human race to the last man, woman, and child, before he would bow down to God's fealty again, while under Michael's boot." Calder remembered the sheer vehemence of Lucifer's vow. He recalled the single stroke awaiting him from Michael, God's greatest warrior archangel. It was God who interceded and commanded Michael to stand down. Michael complied, but very hesitantly. After all, it was this moment that all in heaven had fought for, and now, when total victory over Lucifer was at hand, God forbade the killing stroke. Calder was once again remembering the past, which for the longest time had been elusive and unreachable. He saw the scene in his mind again and recalled it to his son. "I was one of the archangels who fought alongside Michael. I was there on that battlefield with him," he explained. "I was the sixth leader and commanded 20 under me alongside our angelic leader, the great archangel, Michael. I knew how we all felt at that moment. You have to remember, though, angels already know the consequences before they make choices. When they fall, they cannot simply say they knew not what they did and be forgiven. They are given foresight by God, and each of them also possess special abilities, given only to them by God. Those who fell chose it knowing the consequences, and still we did war with them. Now, God stopped us, and none of us could surmise or see the reasoning. God spoke at length with Lucifer. Upon the battlement they reached a new deal. The fallen would be granted a pact made by Lucifer to God. They would truly ascend from their hellish imprisonment to the mortal realm as a human, but not quite human. They wouldn't age, nor could they die by normal means, unless killed by another one of their kind, the label you know as immortal, reflected Calder. He continued, the memories flying into focus. The fallen devil's goal was to fight, kill every last immortal. In doing so, Lucifer would receive the earth and all its spoils to pilfer, dominate, torture, and rule the way he wanted. However, if God's angels should win, then those fallen would acknowledge defeat and cease to exist for all time. They were to be unmade. Calder began to tear up at the sacrifice each angel knew they would make on behalf of God's army. It was the only time God allowed the angels free will to choose their fate. The demons' free will, soul, and all memories would be wiped from their minds while stuck in a human avatar. God's angels who chose to leave heaven and to fall would be born into the soul of a child and become immortal at the age they chose for themselves before their fall. In accordance with God's deal, they would lose their memory and knowledge of why they were drawn to other immortals and of the war they had volunteered to fight, just as would those demons. Calder remembered his childhood and upbringing. It was a lot better than some of his own brothers in arms. However, a demon's insatiable manner of behavior follows them into their personality, and they are not born into children. Instead, they possess those mortals who are unclean spiritually and corrupted of heart. Children can be nurtured, loved, and taught about God. Demons loathe those things and assume the host of the corrupted human for all time, until killed by another immortal. He looked at his son very solemnly. When an angel meets another immortal angel, their eyes will glow blue. But when a demon meets an immortal, their eyes will shine red. God made it so that a demon immortal could neither sense nor smell a future angel immortal until they reached the age of immortal ascendance on the mortal plane. Until that age, they were free to walk the earth and grow as a regular human without being hunted. The strongest of the demons was Gadril. He came from an ancient race in Scythia. They were conquerors for their time, enslaving their enemies and those of their own who voiced against their political schemes. Gadril was what we would have regarded as the flawless warrior, constantly fighting, training, killing. Had he won, mankind would have been doomed to sovereignship of Lucifer. If you believe in absolutes, or black and white thinking, Doyle, it was essentially another example in this world of good versus evil. Religion didn't play into it directly. It simply was the humanity of our race pitted against each other. Calder paused, looking deeply into his son's eyes. There were two possibilities at the apex. I had to make that choice when the final death of the last immortal besides myself was upon me." "What choice?" inquired Doyle, now more than a little curious. "I had the choice to stay immortal. In doing so, my new abilities, coupled with strength above that of any mortal man, would have made me invincible. Lucifer would win, and I would be the greatest among all. Imagine, Doyle, all the past lives embodied in one immortal, every type of fighting style mastered, the knowledge of science, medicine, warfare, love, and hate bottled up in one immortal." Calder stopped to ponder what could have been. His son's gaze moved back to the fire, submerged in his own thoughts of such a man. The possibilities were endless. His immediate conclusion brought the next question quickly to his lips. "If you could have chosen that, why didn't you? I mean, never growing old, having everything you could ever want?" Doyle stared hard at his father. "It seems like a wonderful gift to a person." Calder looked back equally intense. "Doyle, what good is an eternity if those you love cannot share it with you? Immortals could no longer have children after the fallen went amok with the very humans they were sent by God to protect. I will not say living all those centuries was not advantageous or at times desirable, but in the end, all I wanted was a family. After the apex, I wanted to please God and follow his instructions. I blew it, Doyle. After killing Gadriel, I just had to will all of it back to God. Before this happened, I fell in love with your mother. I simply couldn't forsake the love I had built with her. God sent his two strongest archangels, Gabriel and Michael, to me. God told them to explain now what my choice had done. I wouldn't take a deal on Lucifer's behalf, so he didn't win. But God granted me one human life, partially granting me what could have been. I was mortal, but I could read thoughts again and speak to others in that manner. I was given back my foresight. I could have children and create a bloodline, as well as marry and live out a life with your mom. I was allowed to remember everything from before I had fallen to fight in the war. However, I could never again join the ranks of the archangels nor possess the abilities I once had. When I die, Doyle, I will be human, and like them, I will be judged by God to either eternal damnation or heaven." Sadly, he turned his head away and muttered, "My people of the Gaelic tribes were scattered all over by time and human events. Now, only a fraction of the bloodline lives today." Then he turned back to Doyle and passionately exclaimed, "You, Gavin, and Brannan are of the purest, most direct bloodline of the Gaelic Devlin family crest. You are the reason I chose to live a mortal life. Instead, Tegan and I wanted a real life together, with children. We wanted to grow old and honor my people and ancient brothers with raising you to know the past." He paused there, quietly lamenting. Then he finished with, "But my beautiful wife died before we had a chance to talk to you three together as a family. Now, with my cancer, it seems my mourning for her has all but taken my time with you three away." Sadly, he looked into the fire. "Doyle, you must understand that because of my choice to become mortal, the war will begin again." This statement got Doyle's undivided attention. "What do you mean, war start again, Father?" Calder hesitantly replied, "When I die, the souls within will be released from me. Once again, the age of the immortals will begin. This time, it will be different." Doyle took a moment to digest this news. A game of killing immortals was hardly a game at all. Besides, how did this affect his family? The Gaelics were targeted by the strongest of the immortals, who were bent on power, Doyle. I have no doubt it will be so again. However, the difference now is the manner by which immortals will kill each other. There are no great sword masters left in the world who have battled and trained. The ancient samurai were the last civilization to continue that tradition. How then will the immortals engage in battle? Demons will feast as always, a natural desire, but the angels will not have battle masters to train them in the older conventional means. It could become a slaughter. Calder allowed his head to sink a little deeper into his pillow as he pondered his troubling question. Even he, who had taken so much time to contemplate the possibilities of this, didn't know for sure. All he had was conjectures and theories. None of them were much grounded in the reality he himself had lived and survived. A new era meant change. The basics would still remain the same, but the means of battle, along with a different societal point of view, could tip the scales catastrophically. Doyle thought as well. With no teachers, and with technology at the forefront, how indeed would combatants fight? He remembered watching sci-fi movies and horror flicks when he was a kid, and even as an adult. Movies about mutants and superheroes. Man, CGI on the big screen really adds a lot of depth to the possibility. As his mind wandered off in a daydream, Calder's thoughts brought him back to the moment. The Devlin family must be taught how to fight again. This quickly brought Doyle out of his contemplation of possibilities. Fight? Again, Dad? What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about our family. To protect themselves, they will have to fight. It will be ingrained in the immortal memories of demons. They will know whose bloodline it was that won the war. It won't matter if you are an immortal or not. They will come for our family nonetheless. If the Gaelic bloodline is cut, the war will be that much more open to the immortals who seek with Lucifer to use the hell on earth to enslave mankind to their own purposes, finished Calder. Doyle stood. This time he was sure of being done with this conversation. His head reeling, he blurted, "Why can't God just send Michael again and have him kick Lucifer's ass?" Calder went back to the bargain made in the past. God had to sacrifice his best warrior, Michael, to pacify Lucifer and get him to agree that he couldn't enter the battlefield either. Therefore, Lucifer sits and stews over his own demons and their failures. Now, I have allowed evil the chance again to destroy mankind, as we know it. Look, Dad, regardless of whether you are lost to craziness because of cancer, or what you say is true, I'm not a warrior, and neither is anyone else you've raised. Who is going to train us? You? Calder raised his hand in desperation. Son, it is not for you to fight, but to train your children and their children's children. Immortals will be born the moment I die. It gives you, at the very least, maybe 18 years before they reach adulthood and can become immortal. Then it truly begins. Doyle stood up with the intention of leaving. He had heard enough. Please, don't leave. I have fail-safes set in place for when this day will come. Listen to me, pleaded his father. Doyle would hear no more and made for the door. He stopped at the threshold before reaching for the doorknob. Turning back towards his father, he looked solemnly into his eyes. Whether I believe you or not, I do not want any part in this tale, Father. I'll send Aunt McKenna in to check on you. Good night. I have to fly back to California. I have some business transactions I need to deal with. Perhaps your flights of fancy will work on Gavin or young Brannon. As for me, I'll be back to see you another time after I've calmed down from our little chat and dealt with the future issues which are going to result from your illness. He stopped short of leaving, realizing just how harsh that might sound now to his ailing father. Dad, I love you. You've provided me everything a man could ask for growing up. You and Mom helped mold me into the man I am today. This secret you are asking me to believe is way too much to even wrap my head around. It's going to take me some time. Time is something we don't have, Doyle, broke in his dad. Once I'm gone, There won't be anyone who can help you understand the past, which reflects into the future. Please, don't leave, pleaded Calder. I'm sorry, Dad. I just cannot deal with this anymore tonight. With that, he opened the door and left, leaving the last living Archangel alone in his bed.